Sunset Boulevard, Hollywood's most biting commentary of itself. It contains some of film's most classic characters.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
Memorable lines.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Haunting visuals, and compelling stories. It just celebrated its 60th anniversary this year, and it still holds up as both a creepy film, noir, murder, mystery, romance, comedy, horror film, as it does as a unique window into both the Hollywood system of the late 40s and the vestigial remains of the silent era. The film opens with a dead body in a pool and a narrator promising to give us the real story before the papers muck it all up. The voice is that of Joe Gillis, played by William Holden, a down-on-his-luck writer outrunning his creditors and doing all he can to sell his latest script. One might suspect, though, that he drains all of his creative energy on the rampant film noir quips of narration with which he tells his own story.
Rudy never asked any questions about your finances. He'd just look at your heels and know the score.
After getting nowhere with his agent or his producer friend, and even having his writing skill insulted by a mere assistant, and with contemporary slang no less.
What's wrong with it?
It's from hunger.
Joe is spotted by his creditors and has to make a break for it. His car just happens to break down in the driveway of an old mansion on Sunset Boulevard, but that allows him to give his pursuers a slip, fortunately. Or is it? Because he has stumbled into the home of Norma Desmond and her faithful butler Max von Mayerling. Norma is a faded Hollywood starlet from the silent era, delusional to the point of madness, with an ego the size of her impressive house. Max is ever doting, feeding his mistress's fantasies by constantly forging fan letters to convince Norma that she's still as in demand as ever. Joe comes to find out that Norma is writing her own script, which is to be the vehicle for her comeback.
I hate that word. It's return.
And Joe figures he can use Norma to earn some extra money and hide out from his creditors by offering his professional services. It doesn't take long to wonder who's playing whom, though. Joe's car is soon found and towed. Norma moves all of Joe's belongings to her house without his permission, and it becomes obvious that Joe is little more than a canary in a gilded cage. Even more horrifyingly so, Norma falls in love with him. At this realization, Joe makes his escape on New Year's Eve, and since this is the end of the 40s, this is still considered a swinging party for young people. Unfortunately for Joe's best friend Artie Green, he isn't playing his most famous role of Detective Joe Friday. Otherwise, he might have deduced that he's just the kind of nice guy who gets screwed over in a movie like this, and would therefore second-guess his decision to introduce Joe to his fiancée, Betty Schaefer, who just happens to be the assistant who disparaged his work earlier in the film. Despite this, it's obvious there's a spark between them, and the two decide to start working together on a script. Or at least they would if Joe didn't find out that Norma had tried to kill herself in his absence. Joe rushes back to Norma's home and quickly falls back into his role of Norma's kept man. Norma, under the mistaken impression that Cecil B. DeMille wants to direct her script, readies herself for her big return. Max drops the shocking bomb that not only was he the famous director who discovered Norma when she was young, but that he was also her first husband before being demoted to butler. Joe does his best to escape his trophy husband status by sneaking out to work with Betty on their own script, but realizes he's in more trouble when they, unsurprisingly, fall in love. And of course, Norma eventually finds out, forcing Joe to come clean to Betty and ultimately sever ties with both of his ladies. That just lets all the crazy out.
No one ever leaves the star.
And ultimately, we end up back where we started. Funnily enough, though, everybody gets what they want. Max gets to direct again, although it's news cameras instead of film cameras. Norma is back in the limelight, although it's for being a murderess rather than an actress, not that she realizes the difference. And as for Joe, well, he did always want a pool. Writers Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett and actress Gloria Swanson create one of film's most iconic characters in Norma Desmond. Delusional but talented, cruel but vulnerable. She armors herself in her memories, in her own fantasy world. It's simply impossible for her to accept that she's not the same star she once was. And the more the world tries to press that fact on her, the deeper she retreats into the fantasy, until ultimately it envelops her completely. Joe, of course, is our guide to this twisted world, dead though he may be. He's clever, thinks on his feet, and this allows him to outsmart his creditors. He believes some reclusive old star is an easy mark, but he has no idea just how out of his league he is. His car breaking down seems to be his luckiest break, but he might have been better off getting caught. He's an interesting protagonist because he's far from perfect. He's dishonest and manipulative, but there is a certain charm to him. He's really just doing what he needs to do to get by. After all the rejection and hiding and scrounging he's gone through trying to make his break as a Hollywood writer, it's hard to blame him for letting himself fall into Norma's luxurious trap. Is his deal with the devil really that bad of a trade-off? Even his chance with an honest life and career with Betty is tainted since he'd be screwing over his best friend. Norma and Joe do constantly play each other, but it does seem that Joe genuinely cares for Norma too. But of course no one cares for Norma quite like her Max. Seeing the early parts of the movie again, knowing his true identity, it's all the more weird and shocking. He's doting beyond measure. He's truly Norma's long-suffering victim. But at the same time, Max is her enabler, ultimately destroying her as well. He can't stand to force her to face reality, so he maintains a fantasy world for her, the only way he can continue to express his unrequited love. My favorite and most poignant scene has to be when Norma visits the set of DeMille, Samson, and Delilah and is recognized by all the old guard. Finally, she's in her element, loved and remembered, but it's fleeting, and she's quickly cast aside once again.
Turn that light back where it belongs.
DeMille says. It's no longer her spotlight. Hollywood has moved on. Sunset Boulevard can easily be appreciated today for its not-too-subtle digs on the shallowness of the film industry, as well as its powerful human drama. But today it takes some context to truly appreciate all of its own ingenious nods, particularly in its casting. Obviously, Cecil B. DeMille plays himself, as does gossip columnist Hedda Hopper. Norma's card buddies, the Waxworks, are none other than the silent stars Buster Keaton, Anna Q. Nelson, and H.B. Warner. Gloria Swanson herself was a toast of the town during the silent era who hadn't quite made a successful transition to talkies. But probably the best inside joke of all is Erich von Stroheim as Max von Mayerling. Stroheim really had been a famous director. He really did direct Gloria Swanson. In fact, they watch a clip of Swanson and Queen Kelly, which Stroheim directed. Swanson, in fact, helped get Stroheim fired from that film, which contributed to ruining his directorial career. Obviously, everyone involved had to have a very good sense of humor about what they were doing, as this script definitely hit close to home for so many of them. Sunset Boulevard did get quite a lot of critical acclaim, being nominated for 11 Academy Awards and winning 3 of them. But not all of Hollywood was so receptive to such a candid look at itself. In fact, MGM boss Louis B. Mayer told Wilder at a screening, "You have disgraced the industry that made and fed you. You should be tarred and feathered and run out of Hollywood." But despite some of the controversy, Sunset Boulevard has gone on to become one of the most celebrated films of all time, being selected for preservation in the Library of Congress, and being adapted into a stage play eventually. Sunset Boulevard deftly weaves through so many genres, hits so many emotional points. Its performances are superb, it pulls no punches, yet doesn't fail to be cleverly funny, too. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that it remains to this day the quintessential film about the ever-glamorous, ever-seedy world of filmmaking.
The wind gets in that blasted pipe organ, I ought to have it taken out.